Today, in this part of Question Everything, I want to discuss with you something that I experienced during my time at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station. Now, I spent way more than a decade there. I basically grew up within the nuclear environment and within the Koeberg Power Station nuclear culture, especially a nuclear safety culture. And one thing that I learned very quickly as I started to progress there, because I started right at the bottom and I worked my way up to where I was a licensed reactor operator, and from there I went on to be involved in numerous projects. And what I want to discuss with you today is the influence that Freemasonry had on the Koeberg institution, and as I later learned, Eskom at large. Now, I had personal experience with this, and probably more so than many other people that are not part of the Masonic fraternity. Now, I don't believe that anyone should get involved in any secret organization, and there's many reasons for this. I believe that in secret things happen and darkness can actually exist. Behind closed doors, there's no enlightenment. So don't think that you can enlighten yourself by isolating yourself from the rest of the world. It's quite the contrary. I'm not saying that Freemasons are bad. I'm making no conclusions here. I will tell you exactly what influence they had within Koeberg, and these are things I personally experienced. This is not hearsay or just stories. Now, the first time I realized that there were many Freemasons on site is when I spoke to my first shift manager, and my first shift manager came from the UK, the United Kingdom. There were many people from the United Kingdom, and he particularly started out in the Royal Navy on the nuclear submarine. So many people that worked at Koeberg actually come from that environment, or came from the Royal Navy environment where they worked in nuclear submarines, and that gave them the experience, the proper experience to come across to South Africa and work at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station, where they all could work in the operations department and various other departments. But this specific shift manager had a huge problem with secret organizations. He was not a Freemason himself, but he told me, he took me under his wing for many reasons and told me about the Masons and how I should be careful of them, and if they approach you, stay away. So I've heard this since I was a young boy, that I need to stay away from the Freemasons, that they're a clique and that they're involved in all sorts of wheelings and dealings. Now, I couldn't fully comprehend this until I later saw this in action myself. How people within the Koeberg organization were advanced through positions because, as I later learned, they were Freemasons. But besides this, I can still handle that. If the person is competent to do the job and the person gets advanced, I'm not going to get into arguments over that. But where I started having a problem is where Freemasons made severe errors on the plant, big mistakes, and got away with murder. Now, that is when you can see the brotherhood in action and them protecting one of their own above and beyond the call of duty with regards to their position within Eskom and Koeberg and within a nuclear power station. Now, it's obviously put many of them in a difficult position because the people around them that are not Freemasons can see this. It becomes very obvious that there's favoritism taking place. But when they occupy the highest position at the power station, like power station manager, plant manager, it becomes very difficult to actually counter them. And this is how the Masonic fraternity works. Get people of high influence within the lodge so that they can control certain organizations and affiliation, as well as control the culture and the direction of business within an organization. And they do this with very little effort. They will make sure that their brotherhood is distributed widely. So besides just Koeberg Nuclear Power Station, the National Nuclear Regulator had to be infiltrated as well. And one of my instructors on my reactor operators license course was a Freemason that used to actually be at the National Nuclear Regulator and came across to actually give us training. Now they are there to make sure, and he was a 33rd degree Freemason, an excellent instructor, a brilliant man, and he was there to make sure that our training was up to scratch. Now he revealed quite a lot to me, probably more than he should have based on his position within the Masonic fraternity, or maybe he was just putting out his feelers to see if I would show an interest, something I would certainly not do for many reasons. But one thing that he told me is that they decided within the lodge, since way back, who would receive a license to run the nuclear reactor at Koeberg, and whoever they decide is good enough would receive their license. Now this has become very apparent to me in subsequent events, especially when I was on my license course. I remember the day when he actually came to me and said, "You're good," which means I had been approved. And when we did our final exam with the National Nuclear Regulator, an exam that they actually draw up, on my license course, I realized just how far they would go to ensure that the people they had approved would get their license. And I'll never forget this. During our final exam, the invigilator, the person that was supposed to oversee the exam, actually left the room. And the class was sitting there free to do whatever. There was no oversight whatsoever. And because we were nuclear professionals, we stuck to our guns and we carried on writing our exams. And these exams are difficult. They are meant to catch you out in any which way possible. And those questions are extremely difficult and taxing. Remember, this is not the only way we are tested. You're tested in 3 different ways. There's a written exam, there's a simulator exam, and then there's a walkthrough on the plant. So you need to prove your proficiency and competence in all 3 of those disciplines. And in the writing of these exams, one of the students in the class out of 6 actually got up and went and cribbed from someone else. Now when this happens, I mean, the other person, they don't know what to do. They actually can't believe that someone would be that blatant. But this person had done this many times before, and this person is currently a shift manager at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station and should never have held that position if they didn't get there the way that they have. And I have subsequently learned that on many of the courses that there was a lot of cheating taking place. But the next thing that happened, I did not expect. After we had written our exam and finished, we were called into a room where the invigilator was present and asked about certain questions in the exam. After we were finished, actually asked the question without an answer being given, asking what the answer is. Now, there were always 4 choices, so it was like a monkey puzzle where you could choose what you wanted. But it was obvious that that question, you had probably gotten it wrong. And this invigilator wanted to make sure that our marks are extremely high. You had to get 80% to pass. Now, none of the people, I believe, would have failed the exams, but they wanted a very high pass mark to make sure that the National Nuclear Regulator would feel that the training at Koeberg is good enough that they will not sit over Koeberg's back and actually watch each and every exam. They wanted to move the regulator out of the exam process. So this person, I later found out, was a Freemason, and he did this with each and every one of the students, including myself. He asked me about 3 specific questions. We never got our mark. We were just told that we passed. But these 3 specific questions, he asked me again. You know, what I thought the answer would be. And I found this intriguing. But I didn't change my answers. So I know that I passed on merit. And I believe probably that most of the other students would have passed on merit, except for one. Now this person is still at Koeberg and is earning a big fat salary, and he did not get his license without cheating. And this has happened with many other people as well. So the first influence was with regards to testing and who would get a license at Koeberg. Now this is quite a big reveal, and I hope the nuclear industry takes notice of this, because I did raise this as a big concern at Koeberg with the plant manager and with the operations facilitator at the time. So they were aware, and they said that they would put measures in place to make sure that this never happens again. So I did do what I needed to internally to take care of this. Whether it's been taken care of, I cannot speak for that. I've not been in one of those exams in a very, very long time. One thing that I noticed in my time at Koeberg is that these Masonic influences created a big part of the culture at Koeberg and wasn't necessarily all bad. Where I have a problem with what they did is when there is favoritism, or where what I believe they believed was best to keep the power station going went beyond nuclear safety. And when it comes to exams, one could argue that it might have gone beyond that. Remember, these people were still tested on the simulator, and there it's difficult to cheat. You can't cheat on the simulator, you can't cheat in a walkthrough exam, because you're examined in front of many other people. There's many other people involved. So this was just a written exam component. But the principle is problematic. And where else did this principle apply? I will tell you about a project that I was involved in, where we were writing the unit standards for SAQA, for the e-SETA, the energy SETA, to actually come up with the qualifications for people that work within the electricity generation industry. And for a period of 2 years, we would meet together for 1 week periods every month with people from all over the power generation industry, whether nuclear, whether hydro, coal, whether it's gas, whether it's the pulp and paper industries, the sugar mill industries that also have their own power stations. We all met together and then came up with the specific qualifications that people would get for everything that they do in their learning, because these qualifications cannot be found in any university in the world. So they wanted to be able to give us an official qualification. And within the nuclear industry, it's obvious that the amount of learning you have to do is much longer and much more drawn out than you would at a coal-fired power station, at a hydro station, or any of the others. It's far more complex. It's a completely different set of systems that you need to control to actually keep a reactor safe. And in one of these trips that we had, this was towards the end of this project, we had to go up to Joburg and decide on the points with regards to each and every one of these qualifications. It was divided into different clusters. So the nuclear cluster was seen as separate to the coal-fired cluster, was seen as separate to hydro and separate to gas. Now they needed to decide, is this going to be a certificate? Is this going to be a diploma? Is this going to be a degree? Is it going to be an honors degree? Is it going to be a master's degree? Is it going to be a doctorate? Literally, with regards to the amount of training and time that you put into this. And what this would do is greatly affect the salaries the licensed reactor operators at Koeberg would earn. It would also affect whether they would receive a car allowance or not, because all the engineers at Koeberg received car allowances. So if the licensed operators were classified as having degrees or master's degrees, their salaries would be influenced, as well as the fact that they would all receive car allowances. Now keep this in mind. The person that was chosen to go up to Joburg for this, and he was not part of the initial process, when my previous shift manager that warned me about the Masons was the person that drove this and was actually there with us through the initial part of the process. He was replaced in this last portion with a Freemason. And this Freemason is working in the UAE at the moment. He knows me well, I know him well, we travel together. up to Joburg, where we would do the final meetings in deciding what the number of learning hours were and the difficulty with regards to the specific qualification that you would get, so that SAQA can decide where you fall, NQF level 1 to NQF level 8 at the time. I believe it's changed since, but that was the levels that had to be decided at the time. And you would take all the learning that you've done over a period of time and add it all together. You wouldn't just look at individual courses. But the first thing this person told me, and he knew at that stage I was not a licensed reactor operator, that I would want the qualification to be as high as possible, as anyone would be. I mean, sewing machine mechanics were literally labeled as having a diploma. So, when we went up there, he started softening me up already and saying, you know, we're going to have to split these courses. We can't add them together because then the qualification might be too high. I said, but that is exactly what we do. We have to go through all these courses, so why aren't we going to put them together? He says, no, what we should do is we should make sure that the non-licensed operators get a certificate and the licensed operators get a diploma. At the moment, they're getting nothing. They're just getting the qualification and the big salary, but at least a diploma will be something. I said, but we need to decide what the learning hours are, because he hadn't been in this process before. I had been there for almost 2 years at this stage. So I had an argument with him. And when we actually got to the venue where we had to stay for this week and actually make all of these decisions based on our experience, then it was clear after the first day that he was there with an agenda. He was hell-bent and he had an instruction to make sure that these licensed operators do not get salary increases and do not get car allowances. They could not get a degree. And I was actually so upset at the time. I remember after our first day, the Monday, that this specific Mason met with another Mason up in Pretoria who used to be an operations manager at Koeberg. They had a meeting, and while they were having that meeting, I'll never forget, I actually went, this was in Centurion, I actually went to the musical fountains where there was like an open air theatre there by the lake in Centurion. And I watched the first open air show that Koeberg did, when he still had long hair and he used to sing in English. And I was the only person watching him. But I'll never forget that he gave a performance of a lifetime in front of the single person sitting there eating a burger. Now during this time, this specific Mason was meeting with another senior Mason. And I remember that other person used to drive around with a car with a license plate that said Mason 1, Western Cape. So he must have been fairly high up in the fraternity. But after the meeting, this person came to me and said to me that there's no ways that we can make it a master's degree, because they knew that that is where it was headed. That the licensed operator, the entry-level licensed operator, would have the equivalency of a master's degree based on the fact that they've done so many years worth of training combined into one. The learning hours and the difficulty levels would equate to that. So he said to me, plain and simple, we will create other positions to empower and give the non-licensed operators more income if we allow the licensed operators to have a lower position, so they don't have to get car allowances. And he was in no position to negotiate this with me at all. And you can imagine how uncomfortable I was at the time. I mean, he was my senior at the power station. At the time, he was a senior shift supervisor, and he was at that stage not a shift manager yet, but he became a shift manager later on. And here he's telling me that we have to cheat so that Koeberg can save money. This was not about principle or doing something right. This was absolutely just about Masonic influence deciding what would happen with regards to funds at Koeberg. And I was furious. In the meeting, the Tuesday, when we went back, I went to speak to the person that actually chaired the entire discussion and said to him, listen, I believe we are being done in. We are being done in with this person because he made it clear from the beginning, without us having even done the numbers and the time. He said clearly, the licensed operators at Koeberg will only get a diploma, because if they get a degree, they would all have to get car allowances. That's it. It was a decision made that had nothing to do with fact, the facts on the ground, and I was absolutely disgusted. So how many other people's careers have been influenced by Masonic influence? Now, if there's any Masons watching this video, and I hope there are many of you, think about what you are doing. Think about what you are doing to other people's lives. Think about the fraternity you're involved in. Think about whether you think that that is a good or a just thing to do, as you claim when you're trying to recruit people today, because you're so desperate to recruit people now that you're actually advertising. Think about that. And maybe you're not as enlightened as you think you are. I can relate many more stories, but this story will stick with me forever, because you screwed over every single licensed operator on that plant because you thought you knew better and you thought that you were more enlightened than the rest of them. You are no different to the New World Order ideologists and stooges that are fighting for things that are not yours to give or take. I thank you very much.